Well, to stay on time, we're going to start the session, and hopefully some more will join us. This will be a presentation by Preservation Forsyth about the entitled "How to Put Money in Your Pocket and Protect Historic Buildings," focusing mainly on tax credits and easements. As I hope most of you know, that preservation is valuable for many reasons: saving our history, energy, quality materials, and character, unique to each community that makes it unique, and also even less expensive housing. So those are hopefully issues we'll address in the future. We've already talked about some special roofing materials that such out Ronaldo House Ludovici roof tiles we may have a session on soon. But tonight's presentation is going to focus on the economic reasons of historic rehabilitation tax credits, both the income producing, which are federal and state offered, and the non-income producing, which are just a state tax credit. And then also we'll be addressing some background on conservation easements, which have a couple of ways that they're valuable to a donor. Most valued donations can be tax, charitable deduction, and the property tax can be affected by that also. Reduce your property taxes because the value has to be adjusted under state law to account for the value of that easement. Most of these, I was trying to sort of make clear, typically you want some type of formal designation or in place by the time the project is finished, and Tim and David can address that more specifically, but they can be locally if they're certified local government, or the federally designated level as a national registry. They're individual, or it's a contributing building within a designated historic district. So Tim Simmons will be addressing the first part, which is having to do with income producing properties. So Tim, take it away.
Oops. Hello, everyone. Sorry, it's starting in the middle of my slideshow. Welcome, everyone, to our new world of how we interact with people across the state, but our office is staying busy. I'm with the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources within the Division of Historical Resources, and we're the State Historic Preservation Office who administer all the different historic preservation programs throughout the state of North Carolina. As David said, I'm the historic architect, and I administer the income producing historic tax credit program. We'll hear from David later, who's also an architect who administers the non-income producing program, and he'll tell you more about that. But today, in the next 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to go over some basics of the income producing tax credit program across the state and in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. As you can see here, one of our major projects in the state are all the R.J. Reynolds tobacco factories downtown. Income producing projects are basically projects such as commercial buildings, mills, industrial buildings, rental residential, that are placed into service to generate income. And for income producing projects, there is a 20% federal tax credit for rehabilitating these properties. And then at the state level, it varies depending on where you're located and the type of project. There is a 15 to 25% state tax credit that piggybacks onto the federal tax credit. So if you're doing a project in North Carolina, you could have get your cost back as in credits from anywhere from 35 to 45%. And we'll talk more about this later. In North Carolina, there's a base 15% credit for qualified expenses up to $10 million. and then it reduces to 10% from 10 million to 20 million, and then above 20 million, there's no state credit. When this happened when the state credits were revised a few years ago, they wanted to cut it off for over $20 million projects. However, we've only had maybe a dozen in 40 years above 20 million, so it really doesn't impact the program that much at all. And I said it was a 15% base state credit. If you're in a tier 1 or 2 county as determined by the North Carolina Department of Commerce, you get an additional 5% credit. And then there's an additional 5% credit if we call this the mill credit. So basically, if it's an industrial or agricultural mill building, it gets this 5% bonus. It does have to be historic, and there is a vacancy requirement. It has to be 65% vacant for 2 years. And this kind of shows the tier levels in North Carolina for 2020, and these change every year. Currently, Forsyth County is a tier 2, so it would get that additional 5% state tax credit for income producing projects. Forsyth sometimes goes back between a 2 and a 3, so some years it gets it and some years it doesn't, but currently it's a tier 2. So basically with this cap, the maximum state credit you could get would be $4.5 million on a mill building in a tier 1 or 2 county. The state credit can be taken in the year it's placed into service, or you have an additional 9 years in which to use the credit. And there are lots of, you need to go to count it to figure out, what type of corporation or ownership structures there to take advantage of the credit as well. A tax credit differs from a tax deduction. A tax deduction simply lowers the amount of which you're subject to taxation, whereas a tax credit provides you a dollar for dollar reduction in the amount of taxes you owe. So if your tax bill is $10,000 and you have a $4,000 credit, you only have to pay $6,000. So it's a very popular program, and really the only financial incentive for owners of historic properties. The IRS and the North Carolina Department of Revenue administer the tax and finance side of the program. So we always tell everyone in the beginning to talk with their accountant so they can help them set up the ownership structure so that they can best utilize the tax credit. The program, it's a program that's been around since 1976 for income producing properties. And it is administered by the National Park Service at the federal level and the State Historic Preservation Office at the state level. The National Park Service, some of you, when you think of the National Park Service, you think of all the national parks, but they have two sort of sides. There's the National Park Service with their internal programs, which are all the parks, but their external programs, one of the primary things they do are they administer the National Register of Historic Places, the historic tax credit programs, and general assistance, technical assistance for historic properties. So we're happy that the Park Service, are partners with us in this process. So with income producing projects, since the state credit piggybacks the federal credit, the Park Service has final review authority. There is a 3-part application process that I'll talk about now. It does have to be a certified historic structure, which means, it has to be either listed individually on the National Register of Historic Places or certified as contributing to a National Register historic district. And that's what the first part of the application does. It determines that the property is historic. It's a simple application to do. And there is a requirement that you have to submit the project, the part 1, before you complete the project. The second part of the application, that's where you describe the renovation work that you're planning to undertake on your building. And it's always safest, you're not required to, but it's always safest to get your proposed work approved by our office and the National Park Service before you start construction. And so basically you talk about exterior and interior work. We do review interior work as well. But it is a rehabilitation program, not a restoration program. So we try to be flexible so that your building can be marketable in today's contemporary real estate market. So we do allow for changes, but we do want to keep the features that are important to the building, such as this wonderful storefront on this building, bank building in Warrington. And you want to be able to tell that, this is a mill building in Hickory, and it's now an IT kind of offices now. But you also want to be able to tell that it was a mill. So they're keeping the wood floors, the wood ceilings, the columns, so that it's still, even though it's a new use, it still has that character. And we're not going to get into the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, but there are basically 10 common sense standards on different aspects of the building to ensure that the historic character is maintained. And I did tell you that the National Park Service has final review authority of these applications, and David will talk more about the review for non-income producing. The final application is basically after photographs. So because, we like to see as many of these projects as we can. Currently, we're not able to with COVID. So we have to rely on photographs. So, photographs of all aspects of the project so that we can see that you did the work the way you said you were going to do the work with the earlier application. And this approved final application is what the IRS and the North Carolina Department of Revenue need that entitles you to these tax credits. Like I said, you begin taking the tax credits for the year the project is completed and placed into service. You can do a phase project and take the credits with each phase if it's going to be a longer project that takes several years. The federal credit, you cannot take the credit all in 1 year. It has to be spread out over 5 years, but you can go back 1 year and carry it forward 20 years. So you have a long time in which to utilize the credit if your tax liability is not that great. The state historic credit, you can use it in the year it's placed into service, or you can carry it forward 9 years. And it does have to have that final certification by our office and the National Park Service. There are spending requirements. The qualified expenditures must exceed the adjusted basis of the building within a 24-month period if it's a single-phase project, or a 60-month period if it's a phase project. And we'll talk about adjusted basis shortly, and David will talk about his requirement for non-income as well. It includes qualified rehabilitation expenditures, includes basically hard construction costs owned or within the building. And it includes some soft costs such as architects and consulting fees. It does not include, purchase price, enlargement of the building, site work, or personal property. And your accountant will determine which costs are eligible for these tax credits. And I forgot to mention about the adjusted basis costs. Basically, you have to spend more than the adjusted basis which is your, basically, if you just bought the building, it's your purchase price minus the land value. And you can look at county tax records to sort of find out what the ratio is of land to building value. So if you paid $100,000 for a building and the land value is 40% and the building value is 60%, then you would have, the building value would be 60,000. You would have to spend more than 60,000 to qualify. But your tax accountant will determine what this value is, because they've got to determine this adjusted basis value for every building, be it new, old, historic, for tax purposes, because you have to determine a value for which to begin your depreciation. If you've owned the building a while, you may have depreciated it down, to just a few $1,000s. So then you wouldn't have to spend as much. But just looking at the projects that have been done throughout North Carolina through the years, you can see it's been around for over 40 years now. And in the first 20 years, basically, we reviewed 670 projects at a total cost of $282 million. However, in 1998, that's when the state started the piggyback program, which really just sent us into overdrive. And we've just been busy with projects. So in the first 20 years, we did 670 projects. Basically, in the last 20 years, we've done over almost 3,300 projects at a cost of $2.7 billion. So now, since the program began 40 years ago, we've almost done 4,000 projects at over $3 billion in qualified rehabilitation expenses. And these are some of that's what our top 10 projects I'd mentioned earlier that are mostly over the $20–30 million range. And you can see most of them a lot of them in Winston-Salem, the R.J. Reynolds projects. Durham has a lot because they had a lot of the tobacco companies as well. Revolution Mill in Greensboro, Luray Mill in Gastonia. The Haynes, the 3-building Haynes complex is at number 8. The Hill Building and Reynolds Building, the Hill Building in Durham and the Reynolds Building in Winston-Salem are both big projects. Both many Empire State Buildings. They were designed by the architect who did the Empire State Building. And then a housing project in Newbern comes in at 11. But it's interesting to note that Forsyth County leads the state in total rehabilitation cost. They have had not projects. There are a few other counties that have more projects, but they cost-wise, they have exceeded in the last, since 76, $623 million with 227 projects. I'm just going to run through quickly some examples of projects across the state, and then I'm going to transfer it back to David to talk about it. But just quickly, I think I'm at my time limit. A couple of projects across the state that are kind of fun to see. And I'm not even going to go into details about the projects. I don't have time. Just show you some pretty pictures. Department store in Shelby, sweet little bank building in Four Oaks, which is Johnston County, just east of Raleigh. Art gallery on Elm Street in Greensboro. A unique kind of curved in building in Mount Airy. That's now 3 retail stores. This bank building in Kinston is now a boutique hotel. Wingate, sweet little building in Wingate. Someone covered it with vinyl siding, which is hard to believe. Department store in Greenville that got covered in brick in the 60s and got uncovered and restored. A lot of buildings got covered with metal or whatever in the 60s, and it's nice to see the coverings come off and the historic buildings brought back to their original appearance. This one really got covered in downtown Raleigh, which is now a restaurant. And amazingly, it was intact underneath. A sweet little kind of candy grocery store in Southport. kind of a unique kind of commercial house building in Edenton. Cottage house in Asheville, before and after. Another grocery store in the Montford, it's kind of a single family residential district in Montford in Asheville, which is now a popular Italian restaurant. Schools, we've seen probably 100+ schools done, and mostly used for housing, affordable housing, primarily for seniors, because a classroom is a perfect size for a 1-bedroom apartment. We've seen lots of mills from all uses, from high tech to residential, and this Asheboro Hosiery Mill is affordable housing in Asheboro. And next door, the Asheboro Hosiery Mill office is now a popular kind of farm to market restaurant. It's probably one of my favorite restaurants in Raleigh. So if you're ever in Asheville, in Asheboro, going to the zoo or whatever, the table is a must stop. Not Southern Living, but Our State Magazine did a big feature on them about a year ago. More mills, mixed use, high tech, IT, and Hickory. And then you all know what's happened to RJ Reynolds Tobacco Factory, which I've been told is like almost one of the largest urban research parks in the country. Factory 90, great before and after. And so this little unique Hoots, the Hoots roller mill in Winston-Salem is a sweet mill that I'm so glad was saved. And just west of Winston is the Winmock Dairy Farms in Davie County, which is this was an amazing project to see how this transformed and how successful it has been. I wonder how it's doing this year, but hopefully it's doing well. So basically, there's some projects, keys to success. We're now seeing, generally buildings have to be 50 years old. So we're now seeing buildings from the 50s and 60s. So they're not, the Victorian buildings like we used to see. Try to make sure the project fits the building, retain historic features. There is the review time, and it always helps if you have a team, an architect, contractor, accountant who are familiar with the historic tax credits. But the program does a lot. It supports, the built environment, stimulates the economy, increases jobs and housing, promotes smart growth and heritage tourism, increases property taxes, sales taxes. And we're available to talk with anyone if you feel like you have a project that might, even if you don't know, just we're there to help you in any way we can. Like we said, talk to your tax accountant as well. But we like to say the preservation tells the North Carolina story, and it preserves all of our buildings and features and streets and towns and neighborhoods, and it's a wonderful place to work and a wonderful place. It's great to see all these properties being restored, both urban in downtown Raleigh, as well as rural, the Mass General Store in Valley Crucis. We always like to, get all the local elected officials out when we have a grand opening like this ribbon cutting in Graham. Thanks, and I turn it over to David.
Thanks, Tim. My program is the non-income producing tax credit program, which is generally homeowners. So this is a house in Greensboro that went through the program. I've been doing this for about 20 years. Tim's been doing what he's been doing for over 30 years. So, and we enjoy what we're doing. We really like taking something that's been maybe neglected and bringing it back to life. As has already been said, the non-income producing well, the homeowner tax credit program is a state-only program. So your review stops right in Raleigh, since it's a state-only credit. We have a fact sheet that we send out. It's also on our website. It is a 15% credit. As Tim told you, a credit's better than a deduction. And it does require that the building be on the National Register, either individually listed, which means a standalone document for one building or one group of buildings, or a contributing building in a district. You do need to spend at least $10,000 of expenses, and you get to count expenses for a 24-month period. We do want to hear about your whole project, even if it is over $150,000. The Department of Revenue, which handles the financial parts, will limit you to the first $150,000, which would be a $22,500 credit. You can take all of the credit in the year that it's completed. Another thing to keep in mind is you can only do this program once every 5 years. So I always tell people to do kind of your dream solution when you fill out the application, and it's kind of easier to cut back what you do. It's a little bit easier than adding on to it. So do kind of your dream solution, and then just tell us that you didn't maybe get something done. And as Tim mentioned, we do use the same Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. The application process is a little bit simpler. We call it a Part A, which is where you describe what you propose to do in words and drawings and photographs. And then the final certification is a Part B, which is a simple one-page form. And as Tim said, it's a set of after photos to see that you did what you said you were going to do. Similar to the other program, the parts of your money you spend that can count they do not include the additions, buying the house, site work, or personal property. So that leaves a lot of things that do count. And again, as I said, you can use the credit all in the first year if you have that much tax liability. If not, you have 9 more years to chip away at it until you either get to year 10 or you run out of credit. Our office is pretty amazing. A non-computer man that was with us for about 40 some years developed one of the first geographical information systems for historic in the entire country. And it's called HPO Web 2.0. And this is the map of Forsyth County. The blue are the National Register things. The orange are the buildings that we've looked at. And this is open for anyone to go in there. And I mean, one step is to check your house out. So I've kind of zoomed in. Here's 2 or 3 or 4 National Register districts, the blue areas. There's Ardmore, which is a very big in our district, West End and West Salem. So what you do to check your house out, like right here, I've typed in 1413 Brookstown Avenue up in this top left little search box, and it shows me where it is. So it so you can check to see if you're inside or outside of a National Register district. Then you do a left click and it takes you straight into the document, the National Register document. So when you get into the document, then you search for your house. And so here we are pulled up on what I call the inventory, where all the structures are listed. This house, because it has a C beside it, that's the abbreviation for contributing. So this is a contributing house. So it's a candidate for tax credits. You do have to make sure it still has its historic features. This document was done in the mid-'80s. So we sometimes, want to see a current picture, because if it's been overwhelmed, it could have lost its availability for tax credits. It can be retrieved sometimes too. In other words, you can sometimes reverse some treatments that can bring it back. There's a second way to go in there and find your house. You can go to the National Register document of all the National Register documents in the whole state. I've zoomed into Forsyth County, and you can click on these links to the right of them. So here's just kind of a start of the Forsyth County list, Ardmore, and then some of the, there's a individual house, the Bonson house. Bonson was a very prominent company in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem. Here is the connection for me and to get an application packet if you're interested, or if you just want to email me and give me your phone number. I'll call and talk to you and help you decide whether filling out the application makes sense. One of the quick ways to get to our website is to just do a web search for NC space HPO, and you'll go into our website. So I did see one question. I'll go ahead and answer it. It's maybe more of your question, Tim, but somebody asked who sets the economic tiers, and we're also real straight up with people. If we don't know something, we say we don't. I mean, that's the Department of Commerce that sets those. We don't have anything to do with that. It's somehow based on the economic health of a county. To be quite honest with you, some of them don't seem to make sense to me, but that would be something to deal with the Commerce Department about.
Yeah, I don't know what their parameters are, but it's based on the economic strength of the county. And I think there are always 40 tier 1 counties, 40 tier 2 counties, and 20 tier 3 counties. I don't know why they have to fit so into that structure. Looks like if that could be more, fluid, but that seems to be the way they do it.
Okay, back to you, David, or George, either one.
Yeah, we can go to George next. I think Tim could answer this one too quickly. When you talk about consultants, they can actually hire someone who can help prepare the paperwork and the documentation for your reviews and approvals, correct? I mean, they can hire someone who's got the experience and help advise them as a qualified expense, isn't it?
Yes, it would be, and especially for your larger projects. Most larger projects do have consultants, but we see a lot of kind of your mom and pop, your private residences, or your smaller mom and pop type businesses where they'll do it themselves. So, but yeah, those fees are eligible.
Okay, George, you ready? I'm not hearing you, George.
Unmute yourself, George.
You're not hearing me at all? Now you are. Okay. I'll move closer to the screen. Well, good afternoon. It's an honor to be here to participate on this Zoom conference and YouTube conference with Tim Simmons and Dave Christenberry, as well as our own David Bergstone from Preservation for Sight. I'm going to talk very quickly. I'm going to give you the short version, the condensed version of what a preservation easement is and how it can be used in the scheme of protecting historic buildings. A preservation easement can be donated on a building facade. All faces or elevations of the building must be covered by the document. A building's interior can also be protected, as well as open space. The easement runs with the land and runs in perpetuity and remains in place with each succeeding owner. So it's not extinguished once the building has been sold. It is there forever. What we need to tell people, you are giving this easement donation to an organization in perpetuity, while the owner donates the easement to an organization. In this case, they'd be donating to Preservation for Sight, because we are a chartered not-for-profit with a mission of protecting and preserving historic resources in this region. And both the state statutes and the IRS regulations call for a donation to be made to an organization like us. In some cases, they can be made to state offices, but in this case, you would make it directly to Preservation for Sight. While you donate to us, the owner retains all of the interest and rights with the property to enjoy, use, convey it to their heirs, to sell it, but they will always be subject to review on any change or alterations to the building. They will be subject to review by Preservation for Sight. Well, why is an easement important, you might ask? Isn't there the National Register? Aren't there local designations? Well, yes, there are, but contrary to popular belief, the National Register is really more of an honorarium, and local designations, while they might delay demolition, cannot ultimately prevent demolition. An easement donation protects a building from change, alteration, or demolition in perpetuity, because we will hold that easement, or in the case that we would go away, heaven forbid, we can pass those easements to an organization, like-minded organization that might take our place or that would be existing in the community. Easements are the very best method to protect buildings or open spaces, and we are very pleased here in Forsyth County and Winston-Salem that we started our own easement program just 2 years ago, and we already hold 2 easements. When we get to the end of my presentation, I'll have a very brief little presentation, PowerPoint presentation on the buildings that we already protect. By the way, when you are donating an easement to us, there is paperwork that has to be prepared, and there's a recordation at the Register of Deeds. And right now, we are handling all of that for a donor in return for just a small donation to Preservation for Sight. Properties, who's eligible to donate? Well, property of structure must be historically significant for its architecture, archaeology, or historical associations. It can be listed on the National Register, or it can be in a National Register district as certified by the Secretary of the Interior. But the North Carolina General Statute 121-35 does allow historic properties that we would deem, that is, this organization would deem to be historically significant, does allow us to take an easement on a property that is not listed on the National Register. So this does create an opportunity in our region for additional properties to be protected through easement agreements. However, we do have to say that only properties listed on the National Register are eligible for the IRS tax benefits. Are there any restrictions on easement properties? Well, once it's granted and it's recorded at the Register of Deeds, as I said, the owner continues to enjoy the property and can do with it within reason anything he or she wishes. They also have to continue to maintain it. All of that, though, is going to be subject to the easement. And when I say that, we don't disallow appropriate change or alterations to a property. And of course, we want routine maintenance to continue. But when there is a proposal for a change to a building that's on the the easement has been granted on, we, Preservation for Site and our Preservation Action Subcommittee for easement, will review that change, and we will use the Secretary of the Interior standards that both David and Tim talked about. We will use those very same standards, which are a part of the easement document. We will use those standards to review and approve appropriate change to a building. To further eligible sites, I've already touched on this, but I want to go back one more time. Everything basically would be in play for an easement protection. Agricultural, industrial, commercial, institutional, residential structures, or important landscapes could all be covered by preservation easements. And many of you out there probably have heard about conservation easements. We don't operate those, but that could also be an option for an owner if that was what was really more appropriate for a site than a preservation easement. I mentioned the general statutes in North Carolina. General statutes 121-35 cover the easement regulations in North Carolina. I do want to highlight an advantage for the preservation easement donation. Local property tax deduction or assessed value adjustment can occur with the donation of an easement. State law requires that a reappraisal be done by the local tax office after the donation of an easement, because in giving an easement to Preservation for Site, you are giving up a few of those bundle of rights that they talk about when you're signing your contracts and buying property. They say that we all have a bundle of rights. You're giving up some of that bundle of rights by allowing us to review change. So you experience a change of value, and that will, in many cases, but not in all cases, can result in a reduction of your property taxes. And that same loss of value, if it's a National Register property, can lead to a further advantage, which is a tax deduction, a provision provided through the IRS. Those standards are addressed in Section 170H of the Internal Revenue Code. So, State Statute 121-35, the IRS standards Section 170H address various elements of the easement program. Just as David and Tim pointed out, if you're going to be looking at a preservation easement and you're considering tax advantages, you need to have a professional on your team. You need to have a good tax attorney, and you need to have an appraiser involved who understands how to appraise the value of property after an easement has been donated. Those are critical issues that you must consider. And of course, the easement with the National Register property can be used in conjunction with the state and federal tax credits, although there will be certain stipulations that must be followed. And again, professional on your team would be appropriate, as well as conversations with David Christenberry and Tim Simmons to further highlight those particular requirements. I'm going to say that if you have questions about the easement program, the best way to ask those questions is to go to our website, Preservation for Site's website, preservationforsite.org, and then under the contact heading, you'll pull down the menu and get email. You can send us an email asking questions. Be sure to provide us with all of your contact information so that we can get back to you via email or phone to answer your questions. And then I've got a small little PowerPoint here. This is where I become technologically challenged sometimes. And I'm going to see if I can pull that up. And here we go. Preservation easement program. We hold, our program is just 2 years old, yet we already hold 2 easements. The first easement that we took is on this wonderful early 20th century cruise house located in the Washington Park neighborhood on West Acadia. A young couple bought this and undertook the rehabilitation, and it was rather extensive because the house had been sitting empty, needed a great deal of modernization and systems improvement. But here you can see that some of the windows are boarded, and we had to review and approve all of the window work that was going on there, windows being one of the very key elements of a historic building. We had to approve that. Rear of the house, this is the rear prior to the work that's going on right now. They wanted to be able to add a second story addition. I said, we will approve and review we will review alterations, and if all the work is going to be in order, we will approve it. They wanted to have additional living space upstairs. This is so like so many early 20th century houses, small private spaces and very few bathrooms. And they wanted to expand their private spaces, bedrooms upstairs, and add a bathroom. And they came to us with an architect's drawings and a contractor's plans to add a new gable, rear dormer gable on the second floor. And we reviewed it with our team, which includes contractors, preservation professionals, and an architect. Here were the architectural drawings provided to us, and you can see in these drawings the new expanded rear-facing gable there. And it was done, we thought that the additions and alterations were handled very well. They were going to replicate with new roofing materials, everything that was pre-existing on the house, on the new addition. And they were going to use hardy plank and appropriate wood windows for the rear. So we gave it an approval, and they are working away right now. And if we do this again, I'll have some updated pictures for you in the future. The second easement that we took, which we took just on the cusp or the eve of the pandemic, is the wonderful 1805 Peter Clemens house in Clemens, North Carolina. And this house has been all kinds of things. It's been altered over the years, expanded, private residence, country inn, stagecoach stop in a much earlier era, an addition of an L on the rear of the house. The exterior is in amazingly good condition. It has been well cared for over the years by several succeeding families who've owned it. And the last family wanted to sell it. The family who owned it for over 100 years wanted to sell it and approached us about placing an easement on the property to protect it, because this property has graced this site since 1805 and been a landmark in Clemens, and they felt the stewardship even though they were giving it up. They found a buyer who understood what he was getting into, understood the restrictions and stipulations of the easement, readily purchased the property. Here you see the seller signing the easement documents because the seller donated the easement. You can see one of our board members over there on the right who is a notary notarizing it. And then we went promptly to the Register of Deeds and recorded it. Now we're working with a new owner who is going to do primarily structural and interior change and upgrades. At this point, nothing on the interior, on the exterior, so we don't have any review. But the easement program, I think, is a wonderful addition to the toolbox of preservation tools. And if you'd like to ask questions, learn more, would like to consider a donation, again, go to our website, preservationforsight.org. Under contacts, get in touch with us with email. And it's been a pleasure to make the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, George, I'm going to take the screen back over. So we thank those who are viewing us on YouTube Live. We had one or two questions there if I didn't see anything else being posted. So hopefully that made sense. We'll try and follow up in some subsequent sessions. The things we're looking at already are something about what local historic landmarks are versus National Register. And then another one we're also discussing with Renolda House is about historic roads, like their Clay Mudawichi roads. and maybe slate roofs. We're trying to look at some more unusual roofing materials that people have more trouble finding someone to deal with and understanding what the options are. So we thank you all for coming. If there's any questions, let's say if you want to just post them, we can try and respond to them quickly here. But we just had that one, and then another one I was able to answer directly about some old Salem buildings. I don't see anything else popping up on the chat and YouTube, so won't go ahead and cut it off unless I see something in the next minute. But we again thank all of our speakers, and we appreciate anybody that's come to check to it. And we'll have this staying on our YouTube site, so in the future anybody can come look at it and hear the presentations if they missed it tonight. Thank you for coming. Good night.